Transformative approach to justice that is community-led, restorative, and racially just. Learn more at publicwelfare.org and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
On this week's Wait, Wait, Rachel Maddow tries to launch a career as a singer.
Somewhere on Route 9, get yourself a chainsaw, cause you sure ain't using mine. Drinking Mountain Power. Out in Florence, Mass, we give you the power to cut your freaking grass.
I'm Peter Sagal. Join us for Rachel's song stylings, plus some people who can actually sing, like Jason Isbell and Patti LuPone. That's the News Quiz from NPR.
Saturday at 10 a.m., Sunday at 11 a.m. on KPBS.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon. Thanks for joining us. The Democratic Party ticket is set. The party gets set to open its convention in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris chose Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. We have NPR's Ron Elving along with us now. Ron, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Scott.
An eventful 3 weeks, my friend. 2 new nominees, historic fundraising numbers. What do you think happened?
Right after Biden's announcement, things were really up in the air, but the trajectory has been generally upward and onward for the Democratic ticket since then. Now just look at the polls and the cash-on-hand totals. So is this a sugar rush, a media honeymoon? Yes, those terms apply, but there was also something like what Wall Street brokers called a relief rally, because much of the Democratic Party had been holding its breath every time Biden went on TV. Was he okay? Was he up to it? Could he beat Trump again? 3 weeks ago, all those people got a chance to exhale. And in the next moment, they got a taste of fresh hope. The Democrats in general and a fair number of other people are mostly intent on blocking a Trump return to the White House. And they have taken heart from Harris's early performance on the campaign trail, from the reception Tim Walz has received as the VP pick, and the prospect of starting this contest over. They've gone from hang on with Joe to a much more aggressive and future-oriented campaign.
But, to invoke a favorite phrase of journalists, not so long ago there were stories asking where was Vice President Harris in the orbit of the Biden administration? Was her political standing harmed by her identification with the administration's border policy? She didn't seem to spark some of the same potential interest as names like Whitmer, Buttigieg, Newsom. Surge enthusiasm, but she is still just tied in the polls with Donald Trump. Is there enough time to put herself across in a campaign?
Yes, she is still just tied. But Harris was not in the race a month ago. And after just 3 weeks, she has caught up to the consensus Republican nominee, very well-known figure, and she even leads in some polling. Hard to think of anyone else who's done that before. Was she everyone's first choice? No, not by any means, but neither was anyone else. And it became clear Harris had the best chance of pulling the party together quickly, and that's what she has in fact done. But one must say the hard part is still ahead. One edge she has on Biden is that she can focus on the campaign full time. She doesn't have to be president while running for president, but she needs to focus on defining herself apart from the Biden administration and apart from the attacks Trump and company are and will be making. Now, that means finding a stronger line on immigration, perhaps pushing that Senate bipartisan compromise from last winter that looked like it had a shot, but then was rejected by Donald Trump.
And the two VP candidates, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, both Midwestern men, as are we, Ron, come to think of it, but different Midwestern men, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. If I may borrow a bit from Walt Whitman, the Midwest is large and can contain many apparent contradictions. But on your point, these two co-regents of ours are quite different, a generation apart. Vance just turned 40. Their life histories are as different as the presidential candidates who chose them. Vance combines two very different visions of America. One is the traditional, rural, small-town America he wrote about in his book, Hillbilly Elegy. The other is the America of certain high-tech billionaires who have sponsored his career, both in business and in politics. And if Vance captures these opposites, Walz represents much of what's in the middle. Neither the soaring futurism of Silicon Valley nor the grievance culture that has taken root in Trump country. One way to think about the two men is to ask yourself, who do they remind you of Is it an older family member, or is it someone you met in school or on your first job?
And there will be a debate September 10th, right?
There will indeed.
NPR's Ron Elving. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Ukraine shocked Russia this week by launching a substantial invasion into Russia. Ukraine's cross-border incursion into western Russia is now in its 5th day. Russia appears to be struggling to mount an offensive counterattack. Greg Myrie joins us from Kyiv. Greg, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Scott.
How did Ukraine manage this, sending a large ground force straight across the Russian border in the middle of a war?
Yeah, Ukraine clearly identified a vulnerable spot on Russia's western border. Russia clearly wasn't paying attention, and Ukraine sent these ground troops rumbling across its northeastern border in armored vehicles, nothing hidden here, into western Russia on Tuesday morning. The Ukrainian forces are at least 6 miles or so inside Russia's Kursk region, and we're getting all sorts of reports that small units may have penetrated much deeper. The Ukrainians are operating in or have taken control of numerous villages and at least one town. Videos on social media show a burned out column of Russian military vehicles, dozens of Russian soldiers surrendering, large numbers of Russian civilians fleeing by car. Now, neither Russia nor Ukraine is saying much, so we're trying to put this together like a jigsaw puzzle where we only have a small number of the pieces.
Just a week ago in this program, we were talking about the Russian offensive in Ukraine. How's Russia responding now that it's on the defensive?
Well, in a word, struggling. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has been holding meetings with top national security officials at the Kremlin. Some of this has been televised in an attempt to reassure Russians. And the military officials are telling Putin that troop reinforcements are on the way, that they're defeating the Ukrainians, and they'll regain control of the border very soon. Putin is clearly unhappy in some of this video, and these reports appear to be way too rosy. Russian military bloggers are saying the fighting is not going well for Russia. They describe the Russian response as chaotic, the panicked civilians are fleeing, and the Ukrainians seem to just keep attacking.
Do we know what Ukraine's goal is with this high-risk operation?
You know, Scott, we don't. What we have right now is just a lot of speculation. Now, in remarks in his nightly address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, "Russia brought war to our land and should feel what it's done." So there's definitely this psychological component of what's going on the offensive, raising morale in Ukraine, which has indeed happened, and putting Russia on the defensive, which has also happened. Now, we only have hints of the possible military strategy here. I spoke with one of Zelensky's top advisors this week. His name is Mikhailo Podolak. He said Russia has been attacking from these border areas without fear of retaliation on Russian territory, and that needs to change. Here he is speaking through an interpreter.
We have to push them back in some areas if we want to make those areas safe for us, and we are creating this buffer zone.
So I would just add, Scott, that it could be extremely difficult to hold on to Russian territory if the Russians make a big push to get it back, which they seem to be doing.
And Greg, how's the fighting that's going on and inside Ukraine going?
Yeah, Ukraine is still on the defensive at home, and it's struggling to halt or at least limit a Russian offensive in the eastern Donbass region. The Russian forces have seized a number of villages in recent weeks, making it one of their more successful ground operations in well over a year. The Russians just send wave after wave of troops towards Ukrainian lines, and they've been suffering massive losses with these attacks, but they have advanced. And Scott, we're just at this rare moment in the war where both the Russians and Ukrainians are on the offensive at the same time, though obviously in different places.
NPR's Greg Myrie in Kyiv. Thanks so much for being with us.
Sure thing, Scott.
In an election season rife with surprises, you might add this week's revelation by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The independent candidate for president says that 10 years ago, he picked up the carcass of a dead bear cub along a country highway and later snuck it into New York Central Park, make it look like the bear had been hit by a bicyclist. In a video he posted confessing to his old stunt, Mr. Kennedy said, I pulled over and I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van because I was going to skin the bear. I was going to put the meat in my refrigerator. Robert Kennedy Jr. also posed for a photo